Hi, you guys. Great to see everybody. Welcome. Most of you know that we are going to spend the month of February in this little book called The 4 Habits of Joy-Filled Marriage. So this was written by Chris Coursey, and Marcus Warner is theological. Chris Coursey has done a lot of brain science. And so he has done research into how do you improve joy in your marriage. And so that's kind of his part of it. So we actually bought a copy of each of this. There should be on the middle of your table for each couple. So 1 book per couple, and if there's not enough at your table, please let me know. There are extras, and we'll get them to you. So a couple of things about that. Occasionally we have bought a book for you, and we know that many of you are not readers. So that is fine. Right? I want you to hear that. This is fine. The first 3 chapters in here are about the brain science. Dan will touch on that briefly today, but we just can't cover it all. If you're a reader, read it. I think you'll really enjoy it. If you're not, I want you to think of this as a manual, not as a book to read. So just like you read a manual to figure out how to fix your car or how to, make this recipe or whatever it is, the reason we bought these is not because we think you all read them. We know a few of you do and many of you don't. But it has a bunch of exercises in it. There are 4 habits. We're going to do it for 4 weeks. And so we're going to cover 1 habit each week. We're hoping to capitalize on the fact that it's February, 2nd day of February. And lots of people are this is the kind of the love month in Western culture, right? So we're hoping you're going to be extra motivated to follow through. Because the brain science says that if you do these things, you'll improve your joy. If you know these things but you don't do them, it won't affect you. You'll just know something else, right? So we're really going to push you to do it. They say 15 minutes a day. If you can't manage 15 minutes a day, go for 10, go for 5. But Dan he'll give you 1 example. He's going to do appreciation today, which is actually habit 3. But so we're going to pass one out and recommend it. If at any point the exercise we offer to you is not appealing to you, you will find that each habit is covered in the later chapters, about 5 to 8 or something, 4 to 8. Go find a different one. And then there's an appendix which has more for each exercise too. So if you don't like the exercise that's given, that's the reason you have this. So don't feel guilty. Don't throw it into the back of your drawer, never to look at again. But if you're like, yeah, we're bored of this, or this one feels weird, I don't want to do this, that's okay. Find something else. So we hope that you will consider that, and we hope this is a blessing to you. So our good friend Dan Migliori is here somewhere, and Chrissy maybe, they are going to present for us today. So Dan, woohoo!
Thanks, guys. I asked my wife to come up here. She's not going to talk, but she's like my security blanket. So, yeah, guys, as Carla mentioned, I am not a reader, and I'm an Audible book reader. I listen to Audible, so I got Audible. But I also did read this, and it is a very easy read. So I do recommend it. There's some weird exercises in there that aren't for me, but they might be for you. And so, but there's really good suggestions in here too. So I do recommend. Again, we went on a road trip, and I got the Audible for it, and we just listened to it in the car. It was pretty good. So give me 1 second here. I'm just going to pull up my stuff. But as I do that, I wanted to quickly introduce myself, and Carla gave away about half of everything I was going to talk about, so I should only need about 10 minutes up here of your time. So let me just get this going here. Oh, do I have a clicker, or are you going to click it for me? Okay, great. I'll just kind of do one of these things. So yeah, as a way of introduction, my name is Dan Migliori. This is my wife, Chrissy Migliori. And early on, we've been doing Venture Marriage for about 3 years, and I got asked to step into being a table leader, and then I've had the opportunity to come up here a couple times and talk, and it's a real blessing to do this. So I appreciate everybody's time here today. I also want to welcome, I know we have some new people here today. I want to thank the new people that are here today that have not been with Venture Marriage. This is your second week back. So you've made 2 weeks in a row. That's awesome progress. Thank you for being here. And for the people who have done Venture Marriage in the past, thank you for coming as well. And then we do have a special guest in the audience from our life group. Thank you, Lisa and Steve Hanna, for joining us as well. I did ask them to come up here and share testimony, but I'm not going to have them do that. So Christy and I have been going to Venture for about 20 years now. We've been married for about 25 years. This is our third year of doing Venture Marriage. Next slide, please. So, next one. Sorry. There we go. So I'm going to do a quick recap. Last week, Graham talked about joyful repentance, and it was actually a really good lead into what they talk about in the book. And I really like that we defined what joy is, about a deep sense of gladness and contentment that transcends our circumstances. So it doesn't matter what we're going through. We have the opportunity to have joy in our life all the time. And so it's rooted in God. Every part of our joy comes from God, and I think there's things we can do in life, but we really have to have the Holy Spirit come in and touch us to have some kind of joy, true joy, right? And we'll talk a little bit about that. And then we also talked about, Graham and Carla talked about repentance and how we need to kind of sometimes turn away from our old ways and turn towards God's mercy. So we're going to talk into that. Before we do that, I wanted to ask a question, get you guys a little more engaged here. And I was thinking about one of the things Tim said. If you guys were at Tim's message, I love that he was talking about a man and a husband today. And he talked about how newlyweds, how sometimes it's easy when you first get married. There's not a lot of problems. But as time goes on, those problems in your marriage get more difficult. So my question to you guys just yell out if you have an answer, but why do you think it's challenging to have joy in your marriage today? Busy? Routine? Your daily routine? Yeah. Distractions? Yeah, your kids? Stress, a lot of stress. What's that? Money stress. Yeah, that's a really big one for Christy and I. So yeah, a lot of stress, distractions, just work, just day-to-day life. And then I want to kind of get a little bit of understanding from the audience too. In what ways do you find that you overcome some of those distractions? What are some things that you do in your own marriage and your own life to overcome some of those worries and concerns and issues in your marriage today? Prayer. That's a good one. Who said that? Oh, that's a good one, Mandy. Mandy wins. That was the answer. No, I'm joking. What else? Anything else? Minimize. That's a great one. Get rid of your phones, right? Or minimize the amount of how much time you're on your phone. Talking through it. Yes. Communication. Yes, support your husband. One of the things Tim talked about today, I loved it. I don't see Mark and Ruth here. Are they here today? Oh, they're sick. Tim talked about love and respect. Men need respect. Women need love. And so really good message today. And so, these are some of the things we're going to talk about today. And I'm going to try and not talk too long. So, and not only are we going to talk about it today, but that's what Carla mentioned. We're going to talk about it the next 4 weeks, which is really good. I think it's awesome because this is, like she said, Valentine's Day is coming up. Guys need multiple punches in the side to remind them that Valentine's Day is coming up. So I'm going to mention that the next 2 weeks in a row while I'm here. So wives, if your husband forgets Valentine's Day and they're in this class, there's really no excuse for them. Next slide, please. So Chris and I came across this verse yesterday while doing, or at least I did, actually we both did, coming across our reading. I love it. It says, "For wisdom will enter your heart, and knowledge will fill you with joy." And so I really felt like that was God speaking as I was prepping for this. What I love about this, and Chrissy brought this up, this verse kind of talks about the connection between the heart and mind, right? The connection of the wisdom and the heart. And so I love that God talks about that. And I feel like on a personal note, if I was to look around the room, I feel like we all deep down inside want to have joy in our marriages, right? And in our life. And I know that there's a lot of people in this room where you can easily say, "Hey, Dan, you know what? I don't have a lot of joy in my marriage today," or "I don't, sometimes it's very hard." And so I want to touch on that today because we're going to go into how do we find joy in our marriage when our marriage is good, but even when our marriage is not going good. And so we're going to talk into that. And if you can go to the next slide, one more. So that's kind of what they talk about in the book here. And so Marcus and Chris, they kind of tag team how they go about it. And again, very easy. They talk about 4 habits, and the 4 habits I kind of outlined on here, they talk about it as a plan. Play together, listen for emotion, appreciate daily, and have a nurture of rhythm in your marriage. And so the goal of these 4 habits is what they call to shrink your joy gap. And it's kind of a play on words. It's a little confusing when you start to think about how they kind of position it. But when our joy gap is small, there is a small gap where repentance can come in and build. Where resentment can come in and build in your marriage. And so when our joy gap is small and it shrinks down, we have more joy. When our joy gap is large, that's when sadness or that resentment starts to grow in our marriage. So what we're going to talk about today is how do we shrink that how do we shrink the joy gap, and how do we do that through appreciation? So we're going to talk about that today. And then next week I'm going to talk about how do we increase joy in our marriage through play, like having a good time together with your spouse, kind of maybe what you did when you first got married and hopefully maybe trying to do today. So we're going to talk about joy through appreciation, and let's see. Yeah, before we do that, as Carla had mentioned, the authors go into the brain science of how our brains conceptually perceive joy in our life. And so we're going to talk into that. If you can skip ahead, I think, yep, right there, perfect. So there's 4 key aspects that the brain uses to help interpret joy in your life. And the first one, it's kind of like a magnet. And the book talks about these 2 dogs, and they're magnets. And when the dogs and the polar magnets, when they're polarized and they're the right magnet polarization, they come together. And when they're the wrong polarization, they repel each other. And that's kind of what our marriage is about. When we're doing well in our marriage and there's positive energy, they call that the joy bond. Okay. That's really what motivates us in life. We want to have joy. We want to be connected with our spouse or with others. And then the other part of that is, and part of joy bonds, again, it's that attraction, but part of the character traits with that is having smiles in your relationship. The book talks about smile eyes. And I'm sorry, I can't, it's kind of a funny way they explain it, but smile eyes, when you look at somebody and their eyes are smiling. And so having positive feelings towards your spouse. And what I love about what they explain, part of it is how to be yourself in your marriage, right? I know a lot of guys, and I can't speak for women, but I know a lot of guys, they have to tiptoe around their spouses in certain subjects or in certain areas. That can be very difficult. So being able to be yourself, having the security to act like yourself. I know when I first met Chrissy, I told my mom 10 days after I met her, I said, "Mom, this is the woman I'm going to marry." My mom was like, "What are you doing? That's crazy. But I knew because Chrissy allowed me to be who I wanted to be. She allowed me. I didn't have to put on another persona. I didn't have to act like somebody else. She accepted me graciously for who I was. And so I was very lucky at that time. So that's joy bonds. Now, fear bonds are kind of the opposite. And again, in the brain magnet, that's that negative energy that repels us from each other and repels us. That's when we're feeling triggered or disengaged. And so, wait. Okay, sorry. Okay, so that's when we feel disengaged or triggered. It leads toward resentment to our spouse. Some of the characteristics tied to that are hiding our emotions. I kind of talked a little bit, hiding our true feelings. Not being able to talk to our wives or communicate, as somebody had mentioned, with our spouses. Putting on a mask or a facade. And part of what we are going to talk about over the next couple of weeks is how do we identify when we're starting that fear bonding? How do we break away from that? And our goal is to obviously increase the joy bonding that happens in our relationship as well. So the other part to it is what they call the joy bucket, and that's a really simple part. That's just the part of our brain that interprets and basically processes joy. And what the book talks about is the more joy we have in our life, the larger that joy bucket fills. And I think we all know people. There's people in our lives that they're joyful people. And we want to kind of be around those kind of people. And we also know people who aren't joyful people. So that's kind of what we're going to be looking forward to is how do we grow not only those joy bonds, but that joy bucket that's kind of in our head, and we can, grow that. And part of growing it is the exercises Carla talked about. We'll go into some of those exercises as well. Next slide. The other two parts of the brain science is I'll talk about in the book is this on-off switch. And it's like this imaginary switch in the back of your neck, and they talk about it. And when the switch is on, we're connected with our spouse. We're looking them in the eye. Our relational circuitry is on, and we're anchored and we're present. And you mentioned being on your phone. When we're on our phone, that switch is off. We're not connected to them. So really working to have some emotional connection with your spouse. And part of that is having curiosity, having appreciation, showing kindness, and then that eye contact I had mentioned. Again, they all talk about that. And when our switch is off, our circuitry switch is off, it's the opposite. We're not really hearing our spouse. A lot of guys I know, when I was first in my marriage, I was all about trying to fix Chrissy, right? As soon as she would bring something up, oh yeah, here's what we need to do. We need to do this, this, and this. But what I learned a lot is, and what I learned in Venture Marriage is, Chrissy doesn't need fixing, right? She's a person to love first and not a person to fix. So what I've learned is I need to just listen to what she's saying and understand what she's saying. So that's something we'll also talk about. And then the last one is the narrative engine. And this is something that was new to me. I really liked it a lot. The narrative engine is something in our brain that plays out like a storyline. So if, let's say Chrissy got mad at me for not doing the dishes. And there was this one time where I did the dishes, and that's her, I promised I wouldn't throw her under the bus, but this is a good story. So her love language is acts of service. So I like to now it's something I love to do. I just like to keep our house clean. But I was doing the dishes one time, and I did all the dishes, but I left the wet sponge in the sink. And so the narrative was Chrissy got mad at me, and the narrative was that it played in my head was I did all of this stuff, and the one thing she finds something to complain about is the wet sponge in the sink. And here I am doing this because I'm trying to fill her her love language. But here's the thing. That's the narrative, the negative narrative that plays in my head. And so one of the things that Marcus and Chris talk about is stopping that narrative and having a new storyline, having a new concept. And I was talking to a couple guys at Better Man on Thursday. One of the guys I was talking to said, I can't control my wife, but what I can control is how I react and my own reaction. And Mark and Ruth talk about that in Love and Respect. My response is my responsibility. So that's that narrative engine. And how do we create a new and loving storyline? So we're going to talk again about how we do that as part of showing appreciation. Okay, so next slide. I'm probably already going way over, guys. Sorry. One more slide, please. So part of what we're tasked to do is be able to show appreciation, and through that, when can we recognize when we're being resentful? And so the book talks about appreciation. It's actually very easy. When I feel appreciated and loved from Chrissy, I'm feeling a lot of joy in my marriage. And I'm sure you guys can feel the same way. If you're not getting that, it's harder to feel that joy in our marriage. And so by understanding these techniques of the joy bucket and the on-off switch of our relational circuits, I think that really does help, and it leads to that shrinking of the joy gap. And again, when I say shrinking of the joy gap, that means there's more joy. We're closer together in our bond, and again, that doesn't allow resentment to grow in there. So now I kind of talked about this earlier, and one of the things that God pointed out to me is again, there's probably a lot of people here that having joy in your marriage is not very easy or doesn't come very naturally. And so what do we do in those times, right? What do we do when we're fear bonding? There's times where I'm upset with Chrissy and I don't want to be appreciative, right? I don't want to sit there and like, oh, I got to be joyful. That's really hard. And so what do we do in those situations? And I have a story. I shared it with my life group. Chrissy and I got in probably one of our biggest arguments in quite a while a couple months ago. And God convicted me. I started it. It was all my fault. But I said something to her, and she said something back, and it just really cut deep into my insecurities. And so I said, Chrissy, that was really mean. And I walked away. And what I've learned, especially from Craig and Athena, some of the things we learned about like courageous conversations and how we deal, things we've learned here in Venture Marriage, it taught me to, rather than fight back, what I did for the first time was I gave it to God. And I gave my resentment, my anger, I gave everything to God in that moment. And it took me a few days, but after a few days, God softened my heart. And so I feel like when we don't want to have joy, that's that opportunity to invite God in and have that relationship. Let God do the healing and let him do the work in you. And it's not something we can do on our own. A lot of us, we can try as hard as we want, but if we don't have God kind of working on our behalf, it's going to make things very difficult. So when we're not in that posture to receive joy and that resentment is growing, that's when we have to invite God in. Did I miss anything? You usually have something good to say there, no? Okay. So it took me a few days, and then finally I was able to come to Chrissy, and we had a really good talk. And so there was, again, a lot of good healing there. And the great thing about giving my anger and resentment to God in that situation was I felt the sense of, if I can do that one time, I know next time we have a big argument like that, I'll be able to do it again. So it was a really good opportunity. And one of the things I shared with Athena was to give good back to Chrissy when I received something bad, good for bad. So let's see. Those are kind of the key things about appreciation and resentment, and trying to limit the amount of that resentment in your life. Okay. Something keeps beeping. I'm sorry here. Okay. Let's see. So maybe that's Graham telling me I got to wrap it up. Is that you, Graham, telling me? No. Okay. All right. So I do have a question for you guys. And part of the conversation is about appreciation, but the book separates out gratitude versus appreciation. I want to ask you guys, again, just yell it out. What do you think, and this was hard for me, so that's kind of why I'm throwing it out. What do you think is the difference between appreciation and gratitude? Okay, so appreciation is verbalized, and gratitude is just something we might feel like inside. Like, oh, I'm glad Chrissy did that for me, versus Chrissy, thank you very much for doing that. Okay, yeah, that's a really good example, Craig. Just for the sake of time, we'll end there. That was a good. You won that answer. So Mandy won the first one. You won the second one. So, but yeah, it's a feeling, and that's kind of what we talked about. It's appreciation involves an emotional connection, and it's a way to connect with your spouse at a deeper level, a deeper understanding of thankfulness, and by showing appreciation. That's kind of what we're here to talk about today. I was going to go over the four magnets, the brain science really quickly, but I thought that was really important. So this part of the conversation I want to bring up is about appreciation. How do we show appreciation in our marriage to help us bring joy? And so, as Craig said, it's verbalizing it, it's sharing that, it's shared joy. And in the process, what we're doing is we're identifying that connection with our spouse and seeing Chrissy. This is how I look at it. By having appreciation for Chrissy, even when I'm upset, it allows me to see Chrissy as God sees Chrissy, right? It allows me to see her in the light she is. And he actually kind of talks about that in the book as well. So it is a very good reminder. So what do we do to show appreciation? Next slide, please. What are things we can do to grow appreciation in our marriage? And there's a couple things they talked about. One of the things is journaling. Write down what you appreciate about your spouse. I read my Bible app every day, and there's a section in there where I can keep notes and put notes in there. So if something comes to mind, or sometimes what I'll do is I'll just text Chrissy as I'm reading it, because she's usually right there next to me. So it's usually in the morning. The other thing I talked about was a while ago in Venture Marriage, what we did was an exercise called our true identity statement. And it was a statement that we wrote down about how we identify in Christ. And so I wrote that on my phone. Chrissy has it in her phone. And it's an opportunity for me to read that and remind myself how special Chrissy is in God's eyes. And so she does a really good job. Every once in a while, she'll just send me my true identity statement, and I'll read hers. I'll send it to hers. It's just a really nice opportunity. And if you guys are interested in learning about that, you can come to me. You can come to Craig or Athena, and they can teach you about that. Really, really good exercise to see our identity in Christ. So that's one way that I can understand and appreciate Chrissy more. The other one is sending texts. I think it's a really good idea to share what's on your mind with your spouse every once in a while. Sometimes with my girls, all I do, this is what I love. I look on my phone, and you know how you have your emojis? My first emoji a long time ago used to be a little poo emoji. Now it's the heart emoji. And so it kind of shows me the evolution of how I'm maturing as a Christian. So the heart emoji is my first emoji. So I think I'm doing okay. But I'll send my daughters just a heart, and I'll do that to my wife every once in a while, just to know, hey, I'm thinking of you and I love you. The other thing is how I show appreciation, and how we can show appreciation is through our tone of voice. I realized a while ago in talking to Chrissy about her triggers, my tone of voice is really key. I can have one tone of voice, and I don't think it's an anger or anything like that. Chrissy might interpret that as an anger voice. Although it's not, that doesn't matter. That's how she interprets it. And so if she interprets my voice being angered or at a heightened level, that's something that I want to change. So another way I show appreciation is by looking her in the eye and having a good voice in how I approach her. You can write letters. It talks about writing a letter to your spouse. You can do something. Valentine's Day is coming up. That's a great opportunity to profess your love for your spouses in a Valentine's card. So the other thing that the book talks about, and this is something Christy and I have been doing for a while, we've been doing it intentionally over the last several weeks, but it's called 3x3 exercise, and we'll practice a little bit. Oh, I'm sorry, 3x3x3. And what it is, the book talks about it, and again, it's real quick, easy. It's one of the exercises they talk about on how we can have more joy in our marriage. And really, what it is just talking to God in your quiet time or with your spouse, three highlights from your day that you appreciated, 3 things or qualities that you appreciate your spouse from the day, and 3 things you appreciate about God. Chrissy does this at night before she goes to bed. I usually do this in the morning, kind of recap the day before. It's a great opportunity for me to kind of think, what is God doing in my life? And even though they're really small things, they're things that I think about that Chrissy did that day that I really appreciated. Sometimes, and I'll share those at the end, but sometimes they're just very small things. But as I start going over that in my head every single day for 10, 15 minutes, guess what that does? That really transforms how you think of your spouse. And so, again, if you're going through a difficult time in your marriage, do this exercise. Just try it for a week. And you don't have to talk to your spouse about it. Maybe just go over it in your head once a day or twice a day. Think about what it is that you appreciate about your spouse. And we're going to work on that a little bit more on our exercises. Uh-oh. Oh, there we go. Sorry, my screen just locked. So that's that one. Let me just, there we go. I'll just go off of this. So those are 3 highlights. Let's try the next slide here. Let's see. Okay, great. Perfect. We're done. We're going to go into our group exercise. So one more slide, please. Yeah, good. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to break up in our groups. And this might be awkward for some. I apologize, but I felt that God told me to do this. So I'm sorry if it's awkward and you don't feel comfortable, but this is what we're going to do. I want you to write on a sheet of paper, however you guys have a sheet of paper in front of you, I want you to write out 1 to 3 things that you appreciate about your spouse. Now, this could be things that you appreciate about them in general. This could be 3 to 5 things that you appreciate that they've done this morning or over the past week. It really doesn't matter. But what I want you to do is write those out, and I want you to be specific. I don't want you to say, I appreciate my wife is beautiful. Well, okay, she's beautiful, but why is she beautiful, right? So go into that. Go into detail. Write those down. Each of us are going to do that. Once we're done with that, I'm going to give us about 3 to 5 minutes to do that. What I want you guys to do is I want you to hold your spouse's hand and look them in the eye and go over those 3 things, okay? Those 3 to 5 things, okay? Take turns going over that, okay? If this is difficult for you, I challenge you to do it, okay? I'm going to be watching everybody, so if you're not holding hands, I'll slap you. And then the other part, after we're done with that, take times doing that, I want you guys to write down something you can do during the week together. Okay, and I gave some examples. Whether that's, if you have kids at home, maybe that's just making dinner together. Maybe you get a babysitter. Maybe you get somebody to watch your kids, watch your dog, do something together as a couple. And I want you guys to think about what's something you can do during the week. It doesn't have to be anything big. It can be going for a walk around the block. We have a dog. We walk our dog together. We get coffee. We get a coffee date. So find that. If you need to, I want you to schedule it too. Schedule it. Put it in your calendar. And I'm going to check back with every single one of you next Sunday to make sure you did something during the week. So those are the exercises. One more slide. I just gave a quick example of, one more slide. Did we lose? There we go. These are my examples of what I appreciate about Chrissy. She makes our bed every single day and keeps our house clean. For people who are in our Bible study group that come over when the house is clean, it's because of Chrissy. If it wasn't for her, our house would be very dirty. So I appreciate that about her. She makes exercising with me a priority in her life, and I love that. We've had this long-going tradition where we'll run or walk together. And then afterwards, we'll go get coffee and just have coffee time together. And that's a really special time for me. And then the other thing I really appreciate is our morning time together. Before we get out of bed, we spend time reading a Bible study together on the Bible app. And we just have our time with God. And so I love that she puts God as a priority in her life as well. So those are the things. Please break out in your group, and I will stop you in about 5 minutes, and then I'll say, hey, now's the time to kind of connect with your spouse. And if your spouse is not here today, I just want you to hold hands with somebody else, and then Mike and Sean, you guys can hold hands. We won't judge you. So thank you guys very much. Enjoy.